Good morning. It's great to be back here again and a real privilege to be here this morning. I'm just going to start with a prayer. Lord God, I pray that my words may be true to your word and lead us to the living word, Jesus. And that this morning we may hear the words that you want to speak to us. Amen. Thank you, Delia, for that reading this morning. And as Charles hinted earlier, I want to talk about evangelism and relate that to Garment of the Week. I wonder how the word evangelism makes you feel. I want to make us feel, by the end of this talk, that evangelism is like having a garment of the week. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't despair. I'm hoping by the end all will become clear. Have you ever found yourself in the right place at the right time? And maybe you thought that was a coincidence, or that was where you were meant to be, or God meant you to be there. And this account we have just heard is an encounter of an amazing coincidence. I am wondering, if I was Philip, how I would have looked back on my meeting with the eunuch in the chariot. A coincidence, the right place at the right time, or whether I was there because God had told me to be there. And I wonder how Philip heard God's voice. And how well do I hear God and know that he has put me in that place at that time to be with a certain person. So this Philip in Acts only appears in the book of Acts and is not the same Philip as the one in the Gospels. He is appointed in Jerusalem, along with Stephen and others, to supervise the daily distribution of food to the widows, and is regarded as one of the 7 who was chosen in chapter 6. He is called Philip the Evangelist in chapter 21 to distinguish him from Philip the Apostle in the Gospels. And at the beginning of chapter 8, persecution breaks out, and the church is scattered throughout Judea and Samaria after the stoning of Stephen. Jesus had commanded his disciples to be witnesses in Judea and Samaria, and now this was coming true as they scattered out. And it says in Acts 8, 4-5, "Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Christ there." God was at work in the believers, even though something awful was happening. In Samaria, Philip proclaimed Christ, healed people, and did miraculous signs. And a bit later comes our reading that Delia read to us. So, how does the word evangelism make you feel? What do you see in a person when you hear they are an evangelist? To be honest, it scares me a bit, and I don't really see myself as an evangelist. In Ephesians, Paul lists it as one of the 5 ministries of the church. Some are called to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. And I think, phew, that gets me out of that then, because I think I could be one of the others rather than an evangelist. But the term evangelist only occurs 3 times in the New Testament. And as the church grew and spread, it became a label designated to someone with a particular office. But the early translation meant to proclaim good news. And we're all happy to give people good news. So perhaps it doesn't quite get me off the hook of being an evangelist. I don't know if you watched The Sewing Bee, but it's been one of my things I started watching during lockdown. But at the end of The Sewing Bee, they have to name the person who has made the garment of the week. And the person who hasn't done so well, who is going home. And Richard, whose job it is, says he doesn't like telling people they have to go home. That is not good news. In The Sewing Bee, the good news is you get to stay, or even better, you have made the garment of the week. The women at the tomb were the first evangelists, proclaiming the good news that Jesus had risen. They were witnesses to what they had seen, and that is the job of the whole church, of those who know Jesus. So, in that sense, I don't get out of it. I am an evangelist. I can get to tell people good news, the good news that they can know Jesus. So I've been reading a Lent book called Living His Story, and I know a few others might have read it as well. And Hannah Steele, the author, asks a question. I wonder what we think of when we think of the word evangelist. Perhaps it's someone standing on a street corner shouting out Bible verses, or someone talented at speaking, super confident, persuasive. But now think who has been influential in your own life, in your faith journey of coming to know Jesus. Are these words of an evangelist that you're thinking of now quite different that now come into your mind? For me, these people are patient, compassionate, faithful, interested, authentic, enthusiastic about their faith. And evangelism is for ordinary people like you and me with ordinary jobs, ordinary backgrounds, and it's that encounter with Jesus that is extraordinary, the good news of God's love. And we don't need any particular gifts or qualifications or to be persuasive or super confident or to stand on the street shouting Bible verses, but that might be your thing. Evangelism is not something we do occasionally, it's how we live our lives. So back to Philip, the evangelist. Philip is led by the angel of the Lord and later by the Spirit to go to the chariot and speak to the man who just happens to be reading Isaiah. Now, I don't expect in many of our encounters with people in an everyday situation we come across them conveniently reading passages from the Bible sitting in a chariot. But we do come across people, a neighbour, somebody in a queue, somebody at work, a member of our family, a friend, and we can be there to listen to them and to have conversations. This Ethiopian that Philip speaks to on a chance led by God encounter is baptized and goes on his way rejoicing, and is probably the first Jesus follower in Ethiopia. We don't know what impact our words may have on a person we speak to in a day, whether it be a stranger or a friend. There is a phrase, Missio Dei, the mission of God. God is already at work. We just need to join in with that work. We don't have to know all the answers, we just have to be there. The Ethiopian who Philip spoke to was ready to learn. Philip was ready to speak. And I wonder how we put ourselves in those situations to build up those relationships and conversations. And are we ready to respond in love and action? And I'm asking myself that question as well, not just you. It's not always easy to start those conversations. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood to talk. But sometimes those times are the times when best conversations have happened. Pre-COVID, I used to take a taxi to visit a child who was schooled at home. And taxi drivers are often good conversationalists, but not always. Sometimes I found I would try to start a conversation and it would go nowhere. So I'd just look at my phone or out the window, play on Candy Crush. At other times, the conversation would go well. And sometimes I just didn't want to talk, but the taxi driver did. And we would often get around to life stories in our 30-minute journey and sometimes Christianity. One time I got asked about speaking in tongues and being slain in the Spirit, not something I've got loads of knowledge about, but it was an interesting conversation. At other times we didn't get onto anything spiritual, but I became aware as I did more journeys in the taxis that God had placed me in those situations, and perhaps I had to make the most of them. I'm not sure how much difference those conversations made to the people I spoke to, and often I didn't see the same taxi driver twice. And often we don't know what difference we're making to people's lives. And I'm always reassured that not everybody that Jesus spoke to immediately followed him, if at all. But he made them think. Jesus was always ready to have those conversations. And that's my aim, even if it doesn't always happen. Some of you may have heard this story before, but it's one that I need to keep reminding myself. When I first got onto Facebook, I got in touch with one of my primary school best friends, and we were just chatting on Messenger or something, and she found out that I went to church. And she said, "I don't know anybody else who goes to church." And it struck me suddenly that for some people, I'm the only Christian they may know. What a responsibility to proclaim that good news, to live as a follower of Jesus, to be an evangelist, to show what a difference Jesus can make to my life and live my life in a way that shows that. And as people around us see us living, we are showing how we live with Jesus in our lives, what difference he makes to how we shop, how we spend our money, how we relate to others, how we vote. And I'm just going to add in there that doesn't mean all Christians will follow the same political party, but as we're voting this week for our members of the local parliament, how are we going to vote and what makes us choose that? How are we going to live with integrity? And it isn't that we've got all the answers. As I finish my time studying at theological college for the last 3 years, I'm even more aware how I haven't got all the answers and have probably got more questions. But as people see us living our lives, we reveal ourselves as real people, struggling, vulnerable, but doing it with Jesus. Think again of those people whom you respect as Christians, who may have led you to Jesus, and what can you learn from them? So in this book, Living His Story, I found a few pointers. So the first one, let's be prepared with a story for people may ask you, or when you get a chance to talk. Why and how did you become a Christian? And what difference does it make to your life? Philip had a story of persecution and feeding the widows. What's your story? Perhaps you've been a Christian since a child and it was gradual. Perhaps you have found Jesus in later life. What does that mean for you? I used to think I didn't really have much of a Christian story. I've sort of been brought up in the Christian faith, and I suppose became a Christian when I was 13. I made that commitment. But actually, that's a story of God's faithfulness to me throughout my life. Let's be authentic. We are ordinary people, and in telling our story, we need to be ourselves. When we share our story, we are saying what we have found to be true for us, not claiming we know all the answers, but what we have learnt ourselves. Be honest. Being a follower of Jesus doesn't make life perfect. Be honest about the struggles. Our role is not to be perfect and to find life easy, but to point to Jesus. Be relevant. What makes the difference to you? Now, in this time we are living, what difference does walking with Jesus make to you? Maybe it's knowing you're not alone. Maybe it's knowing you are forgiven and loved. Maybe it's prayer and knowing you have God to talk to. And be respectful. Listen, ask questions. Perhaps you may have an opportunity to ask if you can share some of your Christian story. The person you're talking to may say no, or the opportunity may not come up. That's fine. We are to be ready, but that doesn't mean forceful. Remember Missio Dei? We have to trust that God is at work, and the God who is working in us is also working in those around us. Philip asked a question. Do you understand what you're reading? The person could have answered quite differently, but Philip was respectful and waited for an invitation to sit with him in the chariot. So perhaps this week we can think of our stories, what difference Jesus has made to our lives, and look for those opportunities to share Jesus' love in practical ways or with words. We have a story of good news, a garment of the week type story to share. So let's be evangelists and be ready to share the story of who Jesus is to us. And if you're not sure of who Jesus is to you, perhaps get in touch with somebody who does know Jesus and speak to them and give them a chance to become an evangelist. Thank you.